Okay. I have the great honor today of introducing our speaker and fellow Maven, Tina deBellegarde. And I want to thank everybody for coming today. And before I introduce Tina, just put in a plug for our next meeting as well with Alyssa Maxwell. She's going to be talking about her experience having her book picked up and made into a TV movie for Hallmark. So hope you can join us then as well. But now let me introduce Tina, and gotta pull up my introduction here, bio. Tina deBellegarde is a two-time Agatha Award finalist for her Batavia on Hudson Mysteries, Autumn Embers. The most recent addition to the series takes place in Kyoto. Her short stories have been nominated for an Agatha Award and a Derringer Award. Tita co-chairs the Murderous March Virtual Writers Conference. She enjoys reviewing Japanese fiction for Books on Asia and is the membership coordinator of Writers in Kyoto. Tina travels to Kyoto, Japan regularly to visit her son Alessandro, and he's here with us today, and to do research. She's currently working on a collection of interconnected short stories and a new series, both set in Japan. And she has a website at tinadebellegarde.com and also a Facebook author page. And you get some other social media links that you can see on our website. And today she's going to be sharing with us two ways of seeing Western versus Japanese storytelling. Thank you so much, Tina, for being with us today.
Thank you, Nina. That was very nice of you. Yeah, I'm so happy to really have the opportunity to do this with you. I've been wanting to prepare this presentation for a long time, so I'm very happy to do it for Sisters in Crime, especially for the Mavens. And this is a topic that has really been influential to me in more ways than I even realized. And that's basically this idea that storytelling, what we've been taught is the type of storytelling that's necessary. The storytelling structures that we use are not necessarily universal. We've been taught that, conflict, climax, and resolution, that's how you build a story, right? These are really, really engaging and powerful ways to work on a story, but they're not the only ways, right? So I'm curious, if we have a show of hands, how many of us were taught that every story needs a conflict? And, I certainly have. And I think that, again, most of the people in the audience are crime writers. And certainly in crime writing, we've been told that a conflict is absolutely essential, right? But today I want to share a different perspective. I think that the Japanese tradition is shaped in a totally different way in their writing traditions. And I'd like to explore that with you a little bit. We'll talk about some of the similarities, but mostly the differences between their storytelling and ours. And what I'd like to do is see, hopefully, at the end, if there are some tools that we can walk away with that are useful to our way of telling stories. So, as Nina said, I have many connections to Japan. My son lives there. I visit often. I write novels and short stories that take place in Japan. I'm a member of organizations like Writers in Kyoto, and I even write book reviews of Japanese literature for a site called booksonasia.net, which is a great site, by the way. You should all go visit. Lots of great podcasts too. But the reason I reiterate that is because obviously I'm going to be influenced by this. I'm kind of immersed in this whole culture. But what I found most interesting is that my writing was influenced by this before I even realized it. I was reading Japanese literature before my son moved there, but obviously I'm reading much more now. But when I look back to writing my first book, which was Winter Witness, the first book in my series, it's obvious that even then I started absorbing this type of storytelling. Because I wasn't just reading, I was watching their their animated films, their regular feature films, and their storytelling comes across. And I'll give you an example. When I had just started writing Winter Witness, I had a few chapters done. I went to my first conference, my first writers' conference. I was nervous. I go to my first workshop for my first conference. I'm sitting in the back of the room, and quietly hiding back there. That's where I met Mally the first time we sat next to each other. And the instructor uh, opens the event by asking everybody what drives a mystery. And everybody, I'm quiet, but everybody in the front of me just calls out or raises their hand and calls out plot. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what now? Like, my book is not driven by plot. It doesn't mean I didn't have a plot. I had a plot, but I felt so strongly that my story was being driven by the characters and by the setting. And so even then, I was writing a different kind of story. And I wasn't really sure where it was going to take me if I kept down that road, but I did, of course. So let's talk about what we know, which is Western writing. And Western writing has this emphasis on conflict, protagonist versus antagonist, and it's what drives the story. Usually, a character wants something, something stands in her way, and the narrative builds as the tension escalates. And we can see that clearly in the three-act structure, in the hero's journey. And, the hero's journey, the hero sets out on an adventure or quest, is victorious, and returns home transformed. Three acts, same kinds of uh, character needs something, something stands in her way, the narrative builds with the tension. And think Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, these are stories we understand. When we write this way, we ask ourselves three questions. What does the character want or need? What obstacles must he overcome? And as writers, I know I do, we spend a lot of time concocting these obstacles, right? We have to make this something this person has to work for. And what happens when he fails? And again, as writers, we make sure he fails at least once or twice, right? Excuse me. So we know there are clear stakes, there's an escalation of tension, and there are very decisive turning points, very black and white, very clear cut. And as far as I'm concerned, it seems to me that a lot of what we understand about Western storytelling is based in our culture and our cultural traditions, right? What we value individualism, action and choice, overcoming obstacles. We're very highly goal oriented. So our stories are about change driven by action. So we're all familiar with the graph that our English teacher put on the board, oh, so many years ago when it was a blackboard with chalk. And I don't even want to talk about how many years ago it was, but that graph with um, rising tension, you have climax and resolution, right? This very, very clear cut um, arc. And there's almost always resolution. That's another thing that's different. We'll talk about that. We want the perpetrator brought to justice, and we want the couple to live happily ever after. These are very traditional Western stories. But if we're talking about Japanese storytelling, we're going to encounter something very different on all of those fronts. If you take a minute and you think about a moment in your life, that's something that stayed with you, not because something dramatic happened, but because something subtle shifted, right? It's like these subtle moments, these are the kinds of moments that Japanese storytelling build on. Think about the moment it hits you that the person sitting across from you is your soulmate, or the moment when your life passion crystallizes, or when your child calls you mama or papa for the first time, right? Um, there's a moment, and this one's my own personal moment, still chokes me up. The moment I entrusted my son with the bus driver on his first day of school. You knew I was going to say that. Nothing has ever been the same for me since then. I even wrote a short flash fiction piece about it, in fact. All he did was step on the bus, and he did it with a smile, right? He was very happy, but it was totally different experiences for us. But once he stepped on that bus, my baby was no longer my baby, and everything changed. It was just that little moment. But these little moments are actually they may be quiet shifts, small shifts, but these are what the Japanese use in their stories that I think can be very powerful. So have you ever read a book or watched a film and cared less about what's going to happen next, but instead were more invested and focused on how you felt? And the Japanese spend a lot of time in that experience, right? I have a lot of these stories that remain with me. And these are the kinds of stories that make you feel nostalgic, even if you've never been to this place. The Japanese are very good at that. Um, I remember stories from my childhood just because of the way it made me feel. Anne and the King of Siam, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, Little Women. These were books that I felt I was completely immersed in, and I always remember that way. And I also noticed, because we're talking about storytelling, so we're talking about film as well. When I was introduced to Asian films, these stories struck me immediately. These are movies I watch over and over again, and now I know why. Um, I'll mention a few of them: Chungking Express, Still Walking, In the Mood for Love. If anybody's interested in Asian films, those three are like three of my favorites. And and I can watch them over and over again just for how they make me feel. So in Japanese storytelling, conflict is not central. Instead, stories focus on observation, on atmosphere, and on emotional resonance, right? So the senses are everything. It has a totally different focus. Also, something else I want you to consider, Japanese storytelling focuses on a concept called ma. And it's a simple word, but I'm going to type it out anyway because it's more simple than it should be. um, and ma is just the meaningful space between things. It's an integral part of the Japanese aesthetic, and it can be found in all their art forms, from flower arranging, bonsai, painting, poetry, haiku. In all of those arts, you will find ma. In the visual arts, ma is that negative space. And as writers, some of us are already aware of keeping some white on the page, for example. But that's just a basic use of ma. Um, what we're really talking about is something more pronounced. The pause in a conversation, the quiet moment in a room, the stillness before something changes, like just before my son stepped on the bus. That moment is your ma, that pause. Here we were waiting for the bus to arrive. It's that waiting, quiet moment. He's bouncing on the tips of his toes in excitement. He can't wait to get to that bus. And I'm just have a strained smile on my face. It's a beautiful day. It's a perfect autumn day. And it's that quiet moment. That's Ma. And what we were thinking, but we didn't say, like the things I didn't say, um, that's your Ma in that story, in that scene. So silence, stillness, and what's left unsaid can be very powerful and can carry a lot of weight, almost as not as much weight, maybe as much weight as action. And that space, that ma, that breather, that's a portal for readers, and it's a way that they can engage with the narrative, um, where in a place where the reader can use his imagination. Um, I think it's an important aspect of our writing to give the reader an opportunity to breathe. An extreme example of this is the film Into Great Silence. I don't know if you've ever seen it or heard of it. It's a rather long film. It takes place at a monastery with Benedictine monks who have taken a vow of silence. So we watch this film. We watch them go about their everyday lives in complete silence, other than the noise that happens from starting the fire and tending the garden or cooking or whatever. But it's a very different film experience because you're a different viewer. You're thinking more, you're more introspective, you're immersed. So by the time you leave the theater, you may even want to investigate that kind of lifestyle because it seems so peaceful. Another way of looking at this is I practice ikebana, the Japanese art of flower arranging, and I've also done some painting. And both of those arts have a strong use of ma. And over time, I've realized um, that all three of these things, writing, flower arranging, and painting, they've influenced each other. They've each helped me see the other art a little bit better as I come to use it, as I come to develop my strengths in one form with Ma, right? So like the negative space in a painting when I perfected that, or flower arranging. It helps me see it in other art forms. I'll take a flower and I'm deciding where I'm going to put it and how I'm going to trim it. And which, by the way, my sensei calls editing. I take a flower or a branch, and the sensei says, "Well, how are you going to edit this branch?" Which I think is a great word for me, for us, right? And so we do, we edit, we take beauty, we make it even more beautiful, and decide how I'm going to showcase that flower in an arrangement. But I'm not just showcasing that flower, I'm showcasing others by where I put this one, and I'm showcasing the space in between them. It's really an important part. And if you look at Japanese flower arranging, you will see there's plenty of space. And they use that in all of their arts, including their writing and their filmmaking. And when I first figured that out with my ikebana, with my flowers, it was an aha moment. Like all of a sudden, I understood how to do this and it all clicked. Um, so I think if we can understand ma, we begin to understand a little bit about how the Japanese think about their arts. And one thing that's really important is when you are writing in Japanese or preparing a script, you're not necessarily saying what is going to happen next. You really are wondering, the question is what's being felt or what's being understood. Japanese storytelling emphasizes community, nature, impermanence, and an internal change over an external conflict, right? It has a slower pace and it's very deeply immersed in the texture of everyday life. Think of slice of life stories. I don't know if you've heard the term, it's becoming more and more popular, and the Japanese have been doing slice of life for a very long time. Japanese stories have quiet emotional shifts, and resolution is about acceptance. It's not about conquest. Again, it's not the conflict, it's the revelation or acceptance. So just as the Western tradition is sort of based on our own cultural values, Japanese is the same, and their system of writing is based on their value systems, and they value harmony, connection, community, and being connected to nature. Now, I don't want to suggest that the West doesn't honor nature and community and connection. Of course we do. But in the Japanese culture, this is something that's there all the time. It's everywhere, every day. Everywhere, what is it? Everywhere, all once, yeah, that every day. Um, and it's part of their life. It structures their life and it structures their literature. Most of all, they have a deep awareness of the present moment and appreciation for things, for impermanence, for things that are not, for things that are fleeting. And in fact, the value of something increases based on its level of impermanence. So this is a culture that has cherry blossom viewings and picnics. You can't understand the culture if you don't understand their view of impermanence and their connection to the seasons and nature. So now I want to talk about the actual structure. Um, the formal structure is called Kisho Tenketsu. I'm going to type that into the chat. And it's one word, but I'm going to type it as 4 pieces. Kisho Tenketsu. Yes, I think that's right. And yes, am I right? Is that good? Yes, thank you. So it's one word, 4 parts. Okay. It's a 4-act structure, not a 3-act structure. It's used in everything anime, like the Ghibli films you may have seen, all the Miyazaki films like Spirited Away. It's used in manga, in poetry, even in video game storytelling. Um, so your first part is key. That's your introduction of your setting, your situation. Your show, the second part, is the development or expansion of the setting and the situation. I call this the immersion. This is when we get into our setting and into their living of their everyday lives. It's like the time where we can be immersed and be a part of their lives. It's at least the way I see it. The third part is the ten or the shift or the twist. And I prefer to call it a shift rather than a twist because we tend to look at twists in our crime writing, especially as something very dramatic. These are not dramatic. It is not seismic. These are shifts. And then the fourth part is called ketsu, and that's the conclusion. And that's what connects it all. Ketsu, as far as I understand, literally means to knot, which I think is kind of funny because the knots are not always tied up in Japanese storytelling. Um, and in the West, we call this the denouement, right? And which my husband recently reminded me means unknotting, the new in the middle, Noue, which I just never really thought about. I think that's pretty little piece of trivia. And did you
Can
want to
I
say something?
can I butt in for 2 seconds?
Yeah, please.
Ketsu also literally means the end of something, the rear or the buttocks. So it's the end point.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. So
Thank you. See, this is why you're here. Wonderful. Thank you. So again, let's go through that. Key is the introduction, show is the expansion, 10 is your shift, and ketsu is your resolution or the end, right? Um, which I love. So although visually on a graph, the Western and Eastern storytelling arc seems similar, you ultimately have a climax and conclusion. The arc in the West is much sharper, right? And the arc in the East tends to like meander and then come down. So it's softer. There's an arc, but it's just it's less dramatic. And if you can visualize this softer arc, I think you have a good idea of how different they can be. So the key features in Kisho Tenketsu is there's no central conflict. It's not necessary. It can be, but it's not needed. The twist is conceptual or thematic, right? Or there's a change or growth in perspective, but not necessarily something dramatic. The power comes from revelation rather than tension escalation. And let me give you an example. So I wanted to give you two, one in film and one in a book. So in the film Lost in Translation, this is a Western film with very much Eastern Japanese sensibilities. A film by Sofia Coppola, the one with Bill Murray and Scarlett Johansson. I don't know if you've seen it. If you haven't, go see it. It's good. Um, the key, the intro in the story, and is the intro to our setting and our characters. You have two Americans, both alone in Tokyo, both dealing with their own problems, right? Um, they meet, the show, the second part, the immersion in our setting and our characters. And the second part is when we start spending time with them together. They get to know each other, they share some quiet moments, they have a few small adventures in the big city. That's the immersion part. And then three, the 10 or the shift. Nothing dramatic really happens, but they realize they're going to have to go their separate ways. And that shift is really a realization on their part that their connection was always meant to be temporary. And in fact, it's that impermanence which kind of gives it weight and value. And then for the Ketsu, the resolution, they go their separate ways, but they have a shift in perspective. They kind of have a renewed sense of self. They've helped each other grow. They realize that having spent time together, they're just better people for it. It focuses on the change in the perception rather than a conflict. That's the resolution of that story. They just go their separate ways. Um, the novel example I wanted to give you is entitled Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto. I think this was the very first Japanese book I ever read. The key, the first part, a young woman is alone after her grandmother's death. She lived with her grandmother. She's gone, so now she's alone, she's unmoored, she's grieving. But a friend, an acquaintance really, opens his home to her. And that's the first part. The second part, the show, where we kind of get immersed in their lives when their story is expanded, the main character lives with them, with him and the mom, and she benefits from these quiet, ordinary moments with them. They have routines, everything's back to normal for her. They cook together. She forms a bond with this small family. They become a small family of three. The 10, the shift, the third part, is there's another death. And what happens is the main character learns that she can grieve and grow and continue, that grief and even happiness can coexist. This connection that she has with the family is just stronger. Everything doesn't fall apart. Her home is where her heart is, where she is, right? She learns that she carries her home with her. And the Ketsu, the fourth, the resolution of the story, the book ends. Um, she has a renewed sense of purpose. Nothing's changed, right? She's just living a new life. She's mourning, but she's more emotionally stable. She has more connection and she can enjoy life better. She's learned to enjoy life again. And she can invest in relationships. She's not afraid to invest in relationships, even if they're fleeting. And there we go again with that sense of impermanence. Again, the twist is not the conflict. It's driven by this internal framing, what's going on within her. The resolution is very quiet and it's grounded in everyday things. So for us writers, working with the Japanese structure could be an opportunity to think about writing in a different way. You know, we can build a story more around contrast or juxtaposition or insight rather than opposition. And we can write something that's more contemplative or atmospheric and slice of life, maybe encourages us to let meaning emerge organically rather than forced through conflict. I think we have a tendency of really having these big aha moments after they've overcome huge conflicts. Um, the thing is, we have to accept that when we write this way, that it takes time and a little bit of meandering is necessary. And that I think is the hard part for us. Well, not for me, for maybe for others, because I tend to meander when I talk and when I write. But I happen to love reading that way, and I love to write that way. Will it appeal to everyone? Not necessarily, but all books and all films don't appeal to everyone. We already know that. But I'll tell you something. Right now, there is a track record for Japanese this type of storytelling. It's trending at the moment. It's been really well received in the West. I'm shocked, honestly, and I'm thrilled at the same time. Japanese books and translations in translation are very big. Netflix has so many Japanese programs on right now, films and TV, particularly TV dramas. You couldn't possibly watch them all. Years ago, when my son moved out there and I was trying to learn some Japanese and get a sense of the culture, I would have killed to have just one or two. I couldn't get anything. Now I can't watch them all. Um, what's interesting is when you watch these films, you'll notice that there is a lot of time spent on showing you setting and world building and conveying a certain feeling and tone and atmosphere. These particular scenes are not necessarily moving the plot, moving the story forward, which is like a cardinal sin, we've been told, right? Everything has to move the story forward. Um, for example, you'll see in a lot of the Ghibli animated films, there's a lot of luxurious visuals, right? I remember one, I'm not sure if it was Spirited Away. I don't remember, where you see the character wake up. We watch her go through some chores in her daily life. She goes outside, she crosses a bridge. I think she has a picnic or something, but it's beautiful. And you see these beautiful shots of the setting. And the story is just in no rush, and we're just enjoying it. In an American film, this footage would have been all cut out. It would have been edited out. We might see an establishing shot so we can understand our setting. It would be brief, and then the story would jump right into the next plot point. Same thing with our writing. Um, this sort of I love the word luxuriating, because that's really what I think it's doing. That doesn't happen as much in our storytelling. It used to happen a little bit in the past, but as the years go on, our stories get tighter and tighter. So in Kisho Tenketsu, you usually have this breathing room where basically nothing happens and you just watch characters go through their daily life.
Tina, if I may interject one moment,
Please.
if anybody gets the Turner Classic Movie Channel, this month they are spotlighting Yasujiro Ozu's films,
Oh,
and many of his films are like these slice of life. It seems like nothing huge happens. A lot of them seem to be about a young woman who needs to get married and her family wants to get involved. Maybe the parents want to pick someone, she doesn't agree or something. But this is if anybody gets that channel and wants to kind of see some of these films and how they work out, that would be
Nina, that's really good advice because Ozu is I would have used him as an example, but I didn't think he's somebody people would have been familiar with. My son just put the link in the chat for, is that for every frame of painting? Okay, so for a YouTube video about Ozu. And it's so funny that you mention it because my son and I have been talking about Ozu for the last 2 days. So just he's one,
Specifically for Turner Classic Movies, this was produced, this video. So
that's
it's
right.
it's for the same retrospective that you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, very, thank you. Thank you for mentioning it because it really is true. His stories are very much slice of life and they're beautifully done. They're not modern stories, right? Everybody, they're what, son of 50s, 60s, right? Something like that. Really nice though. So for us, this slow type of storytelling may seem counterintuitive, but like I said, this is so many books from Japan are coming into America translated and are really making it big that it does have to make you think that there is room for this, that people are looking for this. Um, so at the same time, and this is what I was, oh, I don't know those. Um, what was I saying? Oh, at the same time that all this Japanese media is coming in and we're consuming it and enjoying it, our storytelling is going in the complete opposite direction, right? We keep tightening and tightening our storytelling. We edit out all the slow scenes. Films and books have cold opens right now, right? Where a book on page one, you start right in the middle of the action. Same thing in a film. In film, we've even cut out credits, right? Because we don't want anything that's going to get in the way of that immersion in the action, right? So we're thrown right in, hearts pumping, but at the same time, we're still consuming these lovely, slow, quiet stories, books and films coming in from Japan. So on that subject of slow and quiet, I'd like to talk about a particular genre called yeah, I'll type that in 1 second. It's called Iyashike. I will type it in. Iyashike. Iyashike. I think it's interesting that autocorrect wanted to fix that for me. Um, so these, of all the books that are coming in right now, these are the most common books, and they're called healing fiction, healing literature. And if you go into a bookstore, you will see these books around. They are the most numerous. These are books that follow the Kisho Tenketsu structure because it's a genre. So the structure is the same, it's just a genre. And it's a type of story that restores rather than agitates, right? A lot of our stories like to get our blood flowing, but these are stories that give you some emotional respite. They're very soothing and they're designed to just give you a respite is the best word I can think of. Now, Kisho Tenketsu is like that already. It can be like that. It doesn't have to be. But Iyashike's stories are particularly so, very soothing. It really focuses on these small moments that we were talking about earlier, on cooking meals and walking through a small village. Um, just the simple everyday life. Most of these take place in a bookstore, in a restaurant, a cafe. They often have a cat. They have a great deal of description using all the senses. That's the way the reader can be present in that moment. And in that cozy environment, that cafe where you can smell the aroma of the coffee and the cats wandering around, and the regulars come in. And these are stories that really make you feel nostalgic, even if you've never been to Japan. The pacing is very slow and the stakes are low, but there can be a lot of emotional impact. I'm writing one of these right now, and it's really interesting how much you want to go back into that location, into that place that's so cozy. And the characters basically develop through their connection with other people, right? And not necessarily going through a crisis. So some of the more popular titles that are out there right now. So if you've never If you don't think you know these books and you've never read them, you may have heard of Before the Coffee Gets Cold, Days at the Morisaki Bookshop, We'll Prescribe You a Cat. I see some nods here and there. What You're Looking For Is in the Library. These are the books that are out there, dozens and dozens of them, and many of them have been turned into series. There are a couple that take place right in the center of Kyoto, the Kamogawa Food Detectives. Um, We'll Prescribe You a Cat takes place in a make-believe street in the middle of Kyoto, which was like a block from where my son lives, and I was just walking around trying to find where it's supposed to be, but it's not really there. Um, so I'll give you an example of the storyline on one of them, Days at the Morisaki Bookshop. The first part, the key, um, a girl has a breakup and decides to accept her uncle's offer to work in his bookshop and live upstairs. Um, I see Nina's writing the Traveling Cat Chronicles. Yes, he tries to find a new home for his cat. Yeah, that was a good book. I remember that one. So she has a breakup. She moves into her uncle's bookshop, works in the bookshop, and lives upstairs. The show, the second part, she's kind of difficult, has some time, takes her time opening up, just reluctantly there, but she eventually settles into the routine. She's working, she's reading, she's meeting people, and she's making connections. And we just sit there with her through the show, the second part of the book, while she goes about her quiet, slow life. And all you ever want to do is work in a bookshop and live above it because it's just so, it works on you, right? It's soothing. The third part, the 10, the shift, nothing really dramatic happens. But at one point, she realizes that her whole life hasn't been on hold because of her breakup, that things move on, and that this ordinary life that she's been living these days have really kind of worked their magic on her. And she starts to have a better sense of belonging and self-worth. She just feels better about herself. And the final conclusion, the Ketsu, she just embraces her new life and she's more confident. It's very quiet story. It's all internal realization, no external conflict, and the whole shift has been inside. And it's very restorative. She's become like a better version of herself. And considering how chaotic things have been, I suspect that readers in the West are also looking for those kinds of grounded stories, something serene and quieter that heals, not just entertains. And these are both. They entertain and they heal. Um, in fact, the healing literature boom in Japan started in the 90s during their and right after their economic bust, right? They had this like amazing economy for a while and then they hit bottom. That's when this literature really hit big out there. And I think that right now we need emotional restoration as well. And I think that's why these books have become so popular here. And I suspect if those of you from the crime writing community have read something recently, if you haven't read these books, but you've read something else that feels like that, it was probably cozy mystery. And it was probably a culinary cozy even. Those are particularly cozy. And I think that there's a lot of crossover, um, more than more than I realized at first, because really cozies, even traditional mysteries can feel very restorative, right? They take place in a quiet village. The murder is off the page sometimes. Think of Louise Penny, Martha Grimes, Deborah Crombie. They're like three of my favorites because of that, I think. Again, I didn't realize I have this continuity in my appeal of my what I like to read. And it's definitely what I was going for when I was writing my Batavian Hudson series, right? That Winter Witness experience at the conference, I think had a lot to do with the fact that I was writing this way. So cozies are a problem-solving narrative, right? It's a mystery wrapped up in a warm blanket and a cup of hot chocolate. They have no violence, bad language, or sex, and it's very comforting. Very much the same kind of setting like a healing fiction, like the Iyashike bookstores, cafes, small towns, right? You see this, there's a lot of similarity. They're both very intimate and tied into the community. The relationships are so important. And community is what helps people overcome, right? Um, But there are differences, right? In Japanese, the new normal is, in the Japanese stories, the new normal is not always resolved, right? They don't always have a happy ending, and they often have to deal with just a quiet acceptance of a situation. A cozy still asks who did it, right? But healing fiction asks how does it feel? And I think if we can tune in to our feelings, you'll understand what they're looking for when they write these kinds of books. Um, Something else to remember is Yashike is very meandering and it's written in episodes. It's episodic, right? So you have an arc within each episode, but not necessarily across the whole book. So, like I said, I'm writing one now, and my episodes each stand alone. I'm not exactly sure if there will be a whole arc. There'll probably be some sort of an arc. But even these books are even written in series, and it's just, 6 episodes in a book, and then the next one, 6 more episodes, sort of like short stories. Cozy's resolve with justice and order, right? But healing fiction resolves with emotional balance. So I also noticed there are some non-crime cozies out there in Western literature. So you have a lot of bookshop books lately. Is it my imagination? Um, it's called Carol's asking me the name of the bookshop. Days at the Morisaki Bookshop. Days at the Morisaki Bookshop. Um, so just generally in America, we're getting, or in England, we're getting a lot of, or English language books, bookshop books like Jenny Colgan's books. Also books like Frederick Bachman, his books like A Man Called Ove, that kind of feel-good, community-based story. I think they approach this Iyashikei story. And then there's my all-time favorite from since forever, Ann Tyler. Not a mystery story, takes place usually in Baltimore, only about family and community and these tiny, quiet little shifts in their family life and what goes on. And that's the whole story. And I just love them. So there's one other thing I want to address, and that's monoganashi. I think I'm saying that right. I'm definitely going to type that if I can. Monoganashi. I think that's it. Monoganashi. Yeah. Um, this is an aspect of Japanese storytelling which refers to melancholy. It's just a mood. It often translates as pretty sorrow. And my husband tells me the French Romantics called this delectable melancholy, which I just love. So pretty sorrow. Monoganashi. So it's really a mood and it represents the beauty of what is fleeting. It explains why the Japanese love stories that don't end happily ever after. They really indulge this sense of impermanence and they enjoy the moment in the moment. So for a story ending, a couple parting rather than getting together is very common, and it's a totally acceptable story conclusion. It reminds us that we need to be present and to enjoy what we have when we have it because everything is fleeting. To put a finer point on it, I recently came across the Buddhist maxim, life, life is joyful participation in a world of sorrows. Joyful participation in a world of sorrows. And I have this written all over my house now because it really made me think. I try very hard to be a positive person, but the world is full of a lot of stuff that isn't joyful. And we have to find a way to deal with the problems and be joyful. And I think this explains a lot about Japanese culture, right? They embrace both the Buddhism and Shintoism, and this is a Buddhist quote. And I think it helps you understand the Japanese joyful participation in a world of sorrows. So I want to do a quick comparison. I see we're getting close on 12 o'clock here. East and West. West, goal-oriented, conflict-driven, focus on the individual and their individual triumphs, high tension, clear stakes. East is atmosphere-driven, internal shifts or thematic shifts, harmony, subtlety, and overall impermanence. These are significantly different, but it doesn't mean they can't be combined, right? So now that we've investigated the differences, what can we do? What can we take away from this? I think for writers, it's always important. It's always worth it for us to understand what a story can be and to stretch our understanding of what a story can be. It's also worth it for us to stretch our writing muscles. We can do writing exercises and practice until we feel comfortable with something new. Maybe we can consider exploring mood and world building before plot. God forbid. We can experiment with writing a scene where nothing happens, but everything changes. Um, I like to describe my books as an example of ordinary people living ordinary lives that can prove to be extraordinary, right? It's like what I like to read, it's what I like to write. Maybe we can write scenes that put experience at the center rather than action, and we can experiment with structures that are free of conflict. And if we're not comfortable with abandoning conflict, and I have a feeling we're not, and it's too much for us, maybe we can soften that the conflict or shift it a little. We can consider where we can put negative space in, pause, stillness, how it can enrich our narrative, and maybe embrace some minimalism and some subtle emotional arcs. And most of all, maybe we can provide narratives to our readers that provide comfort and not tension. I think we all need a little bit of that. And, we could just balance, maybe combine them, Western pacing and Japanese being in the moment, um, and work on our uses of the senses. I think all good writers use their senses all the time, right? But we might want to experiment with adding more or evaluating if we're using all of them. We might just be using one or two. Maybe we have to look at that and make sure we're really making good use of it. Most of all, I really just want us to stop and think, instead of just asking what's going to happen next, maybe we can ask, how does it feel? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, a little bit of thinking about a different way of writing, and I think it's worth it for us to think about how we can expand our writing.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Tina. Does anybody have any other questions for Tina you'd want to?
Fantastic.
Thank you. Oh, gee. Oh, I love that. Thank you. I know I think I talk fast. I try not to but I do. I do. So yeah, I don't know. I really enjoy writing this way and I really enjoy reading this way. And basically that's all I've been reading lately. Um, are people reading any of these? Or is there anybody in the audience who's been reading the Japanese stories? Are familiar with them?
I did read the Traveling Cat Chronicles, and I also read Before the Coffee Gets Cold. And
Mhm.
yeah, I do enjoy, as you say, the kind of quiet and insightful, but without a big, blow up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm more of an anime gal myself.
Oh, are you? Oh, that's right. You told me that. I forgot. Oh, look at that. Nina, can you put me on a gallery view so I can see faces again? I can only see a few faces.
You can do it on your
Oh, there it is.
display.
Yeah,
There
yeah,
you
because
go.
I know you had me on Spotlight. At least I thought you put me on Spotlight.
Geez. Amy, can you
I
do
I
that?
just did.
Okay,
Thank
okay.
you. Thank you. Yeah, the Kamigawa Food Detectives Felicity was mentioning, it's really sweet, and I was drawn to that one right away because it's in Kyoto, of course. Um, but they're mostly sweet, and they just you can't help when they're over just feeling good. That's all. It's like just Carol.
I, I have a sort of observation, comment, question. I'm not sure, a mix of all those. As you were talking, I was remembering Autumn Embers, your third book. And I read it, as you know, like a few years ago when it came out. I feel like you combined Eastern and Western in that. Did you, or is my memory accurate? Did
I
you,
think
and
I
did you
think
do it on purpose?
I think I did, and I'm not so sure I did it on purpose. When I was preparing for this presentation, is really when it really hit me how much I've been influenced from way back all the way with Winter Witness. And I think Autumn Embers is my quietest book of all,
Definitely,
right?
definitely. It's more meandering.
It is more meandering.
Yeah.
And so, of course, I'm more immersed in that kind of storytelling now than I was even when I was writing Winter Witness. So I'm not sure how intentional it was. And that's kind of the point I made at the beginning. Like, I think it
Yeah.
just sort of osmosis.
But I think, if somebody was wondering what they could do with all this great information you just shared, I think reading that book would show them a nice balance of both, what you can do with them.
Well, gee, that's a good idea. And I really appreciate the point because I think you're right. It is a combination
It is.
of Eastern and Western storytelling.
And
So
a successful one. Well done,
thank
you
you.
know?
Thank you.
Oh,
Alessandro, did you have your hand up?
Yeah. I
Thank you.
think these things are also more it doesn't need to be all or nothing for a story. I mean, I know you and I personally read a lot of Haruki Murakami, and I think that even in his really long novels that are really, I mean, plot driven, but I think that's a perfect example of conflict and drama and tension that can also be uh, balanced with a lot of meandering, if we want to call it that. And I think,
Breathing room.
well, you see it a lot where he'll spend enormous portions of a thousand-page novel talking about the cooking and of food
Yeah,
and
yeah,
repeating this process. And I think it's also just interesting that you don't have to have an entire novel that's without conflict, but being able to implant it in its appropriate chapters and
yeah.
stuff. And in Asia specifically, I think Murakami is seen more as a Western-centric
That's
or
so
Western
true.
appealing
Yeah.
artist where similar to Kurosawa versus where someone like Ozu or some of these other um, for film specifically, but some of these other Japanese writers are writing really with Japanese influences in mind and Japanese audiences in mind, where
Yeah,
Murakami and someone like Kurosawa were very much inspired and were reflecting a lot of their Western influences back out. So it's not that they
that's
can't
right.
be interlinked or anything like that.
Right. I'm just typing in the names that you mentioned. So Ozu is the film, the films that they were both talking about, Nina and Alessandro were talking about. And then Haruki Murakami, I think he's probably most well-known Japanese author here in America. Um, and I know he's considered by the Japanese as a highly Western influenced,
Yeah.
right? But he still has his stories still are Kisho Tenketsu. He still has those scenes of real breathing room, like you say, the cooking, the thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, the Ma.
A
All
lot
the
of
Ma.
ma. It's true. It's true.
The Mary had name of the book again, had that question. Mary, were you asking the name of Tina's book or
Those are the only books worth remembering. Uh,
You're partial, aren't you? Autumn
uh,
Members is
I get a
my
kickback. Sorry, I'll shut up.
Autumn Members is the third book in my series, and it takes place in Japan. And that's the book that Carol was talking about. Yes, Autumn Members, that's the one that Carol was talking about.
And
That's
if I might add that Mary is the recipient possibly of that book. She won she's the name that I drew from the hat, so she wins one of your books,
oh,
Tina.
that's wonderful. Thank you, Mary. So, Mary, you let me know which one we'll talk. We'll figure out how to communicate. You give me an email address, and I'll send out the book to you, and you
I'll
decide which one you want.
I'll provide Mary's email address to you, Tina, and this way you two can chat.
Okay, and then I'll write to you, Mary. You'll hear from me, and then we can talk about which book you'd like. Oh, that's great.
was an amazing talk? Thank you so much, Tina. It was great. And I know everyone else really enjoyed it. Hope
Thank you,
everybody
Nina.
join us next month as well for Alyssa Maxwell. Um, shall we conclude the meeting? Well, we're 1 minute early, but
No, we're good. We're good, unless there's a last second question, but I think we're good. Thank you. You've been such a nice audience, and this was fun for me as well. Thank you, Nina, and and Amy, and thank you for hosting me.
Thank you for being here, Nina and Tina. Wonderful conversation. Great job from you both. So
That was
appreciate it.
awesome. Great job.
Thank, Thank you very much. And thank you to those of you who stayed up till 1 in the morning. I really appreciate it.